I think the remote worker discussion specifically for the last year has been pretty hammered down, and I do like to point out that I don't think there should be a distinction between being remote or being on premises or in the office. So that's why I like to talk about more like a distributed workforce than a remote worker solution. Unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your where you stand on that, a lot of the Cisco literature are going to talk about specifically Cisco secure remote worker. So across the presentation, we might see that, but I just want to make kind of a point for it's not only to protect at home or in a coffee shop. I do think for specifically for small businesses or mid-sized, um, it's a pretty good approach to have one holistic view across whether we're at home or at the office. So let's jump in right away. So a bit of numbers, I think, like specifically with the last year, um, we've kind of seen it that well, there's in the U.S. 56% of employees figure out that well, a lot of what they do they can actually do it remotely, whether it's from home or from being on the road, a coffee shop, or they don't need to be physically sitting at the office to do their job. And then some numbers on thanks or because of the pandemic, we do see a lot more trending towards work from home since there's a lot of different advantages for it. So, as well on the employer side than on the employee side. So we start to look more and more with that. Like I'm sure most of you are still probably working from home, I guess. In my case, I think it's been a year and a half since I've set foot in somewhat of an office. So so it is working for some specific roles. But if we talk, expanding that specific, the work boundaries are expanding. So there's also a couple of challenges that arise from doing so. So the main key ones are really around verifying the user identity. So making sure that the authenticity of someone, part of our teams is really who they are. Um, then now that there's a lot more, let's say, SaaS applications, um, a lot more infrastructure as a service deployed to take into account that we don't necessarily need to be at the office. So why should our applications also be at the office? So we start to see more and more workloads being spun up in infrastructure like AWS or Azure, without even naming Office 365 as the as a pretty big proponent to SaaS that pretty much all businesses use. And we talk about company apps, but it's mostly data, since that's really what attackers are really looking for. That's what they exchange for money, whether it's through a ransomware, uh, you know, asking for ransom to get money, or basically just doing data exfiltration and selling back that data on the dark web, for example. Um, so now that we're not contained in the office, this is one key area where we need to focus more. And then, defending against potential threats, those can be in multiple forms, whether it's URLs through email, phishing attempts, malware. There can be a lot of different threats that are available now. And again, those can be. It didn't change over time whether we're remote or we're at the office. It's just that now, since we don't have the same um, perimeter as we had before, we need to rethink how we were looking at those challenges. And now, I think the most important of all, like security is one thing. Those key points are really focused on really like specific security controls. But specifically for mid-sized, I think the key area we need to focus more is bringing everything together in a concise manner. So being able to get all those different products working together to not alienate our IT admins, which like I like to point out, most of them are IT admins and not security analysts or security admins, just because we're mostly in my customer base, it's mostly 4, 5 people managing the whole kitchen sink of IT for a couple hundred of employees. So with that in mind, we'll focus on three key areas, and that's where the Cisco literature really kind of uh, confuses a bit, since we're going to talk Cisco remote worker, but it's really just Cisco secure. I like to call it Cisco secure workforce, since it's really not only at home but everywhere. So we'll focus on three things: verify user identity to build trust on the user, enable secure access, and then defend against threats. So how does that look like from a, let's say, a capability perspective? These are more like key areas, but in terms of capabilities, we'll mostly look at four different product without naming them right now. So MFA is going to be the first one. That's really where it comes down to. A lot of ransomware attempts, phishing attempts really come down to compromised credentials. So having MFA as a first starting point is really where a lot of those SaaS applications, cloud apps delivered inside of Azure, AWS, or even on-premises application are really going to be secured from an end user standpoint. Following that, we do have VPN. So that's a for those more legacy or on-premises type of workloads, will still require VPN. So how can that all tie back to the rest of the security stack? And then the two last points being cloud edge security as well as advanced endpoint protection. So being able to really get that first line of defense through any outbound calls, and then being able to actually secure the asset. And in the end, it's really to protect the same way we would for anything that's on the web or anything that's on the corporate network. So there shouldn't be any distinction between the two. So this is where, like, from an integrated standpoint, we'll actually look at it from a Cisco standpoint. This is where the actual products are going to be, Cisco Duo to map to the MFA, Cisco AnyConnect for the VPN client. We'll have Cisco Umbrella as our first line of defense, and Secure Endpoint, which was formerly known as Advanced Malware Protection, or AMP, to protect the endpoint. So we'll look into each of them more in detail throughout this presentation. So let's first start with Duo. So really the main point of any MFA type of deployment. So it's not, from an IT side, it's something that's fairly, let's say, simple or fairly easy to understand why we need MFA. But in the end, I've seen a lot of projects that the main reason the rollout didn't necessarily go as planned, or the project itself didn't complete, is for end user adoption, which can be more of a challenge in some types of industries where it's not necessarily well catered to IT. So this is really where Duo really stands out. So not only from a policy standpoint for the IT side, but also from an end user standpoint, from being able to bring a simple self-enrolling type of rollout that we can do to our end users. And then it's really it's really a simple type of workflow to look at. So we do enable end users, when they access a secured application, to self-enroll if they're not already enrolled. We're talking about a few simple clicks that can integrate with things like your mobile phone. So it's a fairly streamlined process to get through there. And then different options. One of the main key point that I get for some industries, specifically in manufacturing, is what if my end user don't have any cell phones to work with? So we do have some hardware, other types of hardware, options for those specific use cases. And then that way, when we get there, it does help us to really have a good overview of what devices are used, not only to authenticate, but also to access applications, since now we do have a hook into that authentication phase. So once we get that, we do get the visibility out of it. This gives us a couple of key additional integration points. So from a visibility standpoint, there's no such thing as not knowing what's connecting to my application, since everything is front-end by Duo. So that means, allowed access as well as denied access now are all visible through the Duo dashboard and reporting. This is where we can also, the two next thing that really is possible now that we have that hook is to be able to validate the posture of a device. So not only taking into account the authentication of that of said endpoint and user, but also making sure that it is part of the trusted devices. So for example, is it part of our corporate asset fleet or is it a personal device? So for some services like Office 365, I might not want my end users to be able to connect to their mailbox from their personal computers, since that can be a pretty good way of getting infected through an asset that wasn't managed by security tooling. So that's one thing that's possible, as well as continuous inspections. So if we do have a corporate asset that is managed with secure endpoint, for example, and we do have a security incident, we can actually tie the two together so that if we have an endpoint that is compromised, we'll actually reflect that back into Duo to lock down user access from that specific device, or just user access in general. So we do have that retrospection that can be done between the EDR and then the MFA product. From a VPN standpoint, AnyConnect is really going to be the kind of the foundation, the vector of installation and deployment in a lot of cases for all of the products that we're talking today, or all of the capabilities. So we can leverage it. We're already leveraging it most of the time for VPN access. So that's kind of the first point. But then we really see that as a key integration point for a lot of other features, mainly for web and for endpoint protection. We already have a VPN client that's installed, so why not leverage that same agent and then distribute the other modules that will enable those additional features. So this is where we'll do the integration with things like Cisco Umbrella, with secure endpoint, and then even for some more on the infrastructure side, if we want to do posturing, we'll not deploy an additional agent. We'll actually use the posture agent from ICE to be able to do that if we really want to get there, as well as the integration with the MFA. So really tying everything into AnyConnect. And then from a deployment standpoint, this is where we can use the VPN head-end, your VPN servers or firewalls, to be able to distribute software. So the next time an end user connects, you can actually deploy the full suite of product, and also being able to apply an always-on protection. So for some types of workloads, or mainly some types of management workloads, like things like SCCM, GPO through Active Directory, it's a bit harder to tackle that issue when you're not sitting in the office. So that's where something like AnyConnect can really help, since we do have the option to go with an always-on VPN to cater to that need.
Sorry, Kevin, I have a question.
Yes.
Over here from Ellie. He says, let's say someone connects to his account, but from an unknown IP. Would we be able to get a notification to monitor it?
Yep. So depending on what type of IP we're talking about, so we do have the possibility through the log mechanism of Duo, for example, to kick that into a specific workflow. So that's one thing I'm going to talk a bit later on in the presentation. So we do have all those different key products, but then we have a platform to integrate all of them and also extend all of those products through either other Cisco products, whether they're security or not, but also other types of platforms, like some other cloud services, or some other even third-party security services. So that could be something where we can start an investigation on a specific IP address based on that. But I'll tackle that point maybe a bit later on. But so the short answer is yes. The longer answer is going to come in the upcoming minutes.
Awesome, thank you.
So we've tackled more of the secure access part of our first two out of the three objectives we had. So really, when we come down to Umbrella and secure endpoint, this is really the threat protection. So mainly having that first line and last line of defense layered, on top of each other to be able to secure our distributed workforce. So this is where, like from an Umbrella standpoint, we'll protect mainly, Umbrella was mainly a DNS layer protection service. So we'll be able on endpoints in the office, covering whole offices, whole sites, as well as just up down to the endpoint, being able to protect against DNS-based attacks. So it's mainly going to be through threat intelligence around the different domains that could host malware or host any type of phishing, camping, and things like that. So we'll be able to really get that first layer of defense. Where we start to go beyond just that is to have a persistent DNS as well as web monitoring. So being able to extend that to secure web gateway type of features. So mainly being able to not only do DNS but do web proxying, do HTTPS decryption, apply file inspection, apply CASB features with upcoming DLP features as well, and then be able to, since this is really the first line of defense, like I said, the first line of defense, being able to block all of those threats before they even touch any endpoint or any infrastructure in my environment. And then so that's really the first layer of defense. Then we really when we get to the endpoint, we get a malicious observable on the endpoint. This is where we'll apply some proactive behavioral engines to protect the endpoint. So not only signature based, but also or hash based type of recognition, but we'll also protect based on different key security engines that acts in different ways that will mitigate some of the 0-day exploit that could happen, since will not fall under the signature based detection engines. And then again, it's not a next gen AV solution, it's an EDR platform. So meaning that if there is a security incident, or more when there's going to be a security incident that happens, you'll have all the tooling to really do that detection and response, let's say the after the fact, to be able to not only remediate but also evaluate the scope of a specific security incident. And all of that is backed by industry renowned threat intel from our research group, Cisco Talos. So just to kind of wrap up and bring everything back together and show where kind of the key highlights of how everything works together is. So the first thing is, we talked about Duo, we talked about AnyConnect. So this is really where the two can work in conjunction to use Duo not only to protect any type of SaaS or IaaS apps, but also to be able to leverage the AnyConnect VPN client to protect whoever connects back to the office, and apply posturing on top of that. So not only since AnyConnect you can install it on an endpoint and you could just connect with your personal device, Duo is really where you could add that extra layer of protection of, well, let's look at the posture of the device, let's look if it's a corporate asset, let's do geolocation blocking, making sure that anyone that tries to connect is, for example, in Canada and US. So we really get that, and then we get the trust monitor on top of it, which is a Duo feature to really see that more of that behavioral analytics to see is it normal that a user connects from Quebec and then 5 minutes later connects from San Jose, which is humanly impossible to travel. So there's a couple of things like that that can really pair well together. And all of those checks can also be on the SaaS end as well. So it's not limited to AnyConnect. Then when we look at AnyConnect and Secure Endpoint, this is where we can leverage the EDR to check whether or not we pass posture from a VPN standpoint. So if we don't, for example,
Can you still hear
Kevin,
me?
we lost you for a second there.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Like, it just glitched on my end. So are you still seeing my presentation?
I see the presentation. Yeah, we don't see your face, but we hear you again.
Okay, I'll probably just keep the video turned off.
Sure, if you're having some connectivity.
Yeah, my girlfriend told me, she asked me earlier on, did I lose power, since there was something in my corner of the world that seemed to have happened. So I don't know if now it reached my house, but if you're just still hearing me, I can go on. So where did I cut? Just to start over from there.
The last thing I heard was AnyConnect.
Okay, so
If
we'll
that
just,
helps.
yeah, we'll just continue from there. So you did hear me talk about Duo and AnyConnect,
Yes.
or okay, got it. So we'll just go from there. So really, the next thing is with the AnyConnect and secure endpoint. This is really where we can leverage the EDR to be a posture element when we connect back to using AnyConnect. So if we don't have something like Duo, we can still use AnyConnect for our VPN clients, and then do a posture check if AMP is installed or AMP is compliant with our policy. So being able to apply that additional check on devices that connects to my environment. So this is where we can really easily integrate in that way. And then the last one is really Umbrella and secure endpoint. So specifically, since those two kind of layer up really well, one example that I shared was earlier on with the EDR capabilities is the fact that if you get a security incident, you can start with your investigation from let's say, compromised endpoint. So we had an indication of compromise on one of the devices. So we know that there's potential malware that was detonated on an endpoint. So how can I evaluate the coverage of that specific incident? So that's where we can pair Umbrella and secure endpoint to get that answer. So we go from a file hash that was tied to a specific URL or domain, which Umbrella has information about. So we have an indication of compromise on a single endpoint, but it's tied to a domain that was communicated against like 3 different endpoints in my environment. So now I know that I only have one compromise, but I might have a potential 2 other endpoints that could be compromised. So it does help me to proactively go and either put them in a triage group or even isolate them if I want to be more aggressive in my investigation process. So this really helps to kind of show, like, from a more of a holistic approach, how a security incident could rampage in my environment if I didn't have those security tools in place. So from a more of a UI standpoint, from the end user side, this is really what it boils down to. So on the endpoint, you'll get the AnyConnect client with the transparent modules of Umbrella, of AMP running in the background, of the posture module, all inside of AnyConnect. And the main thing is, specifically for Umbrella, there's no need to connect to VPN to enable it, similar to what we would do previously, where if we want any type of web security, you would need to VPN back to the office to be behind web proxies and firewalls. Now it's a transparent process. So even if you're not on VPN, you're protected. So from an end user standpoint, you're still protected by Cisco Umbrella. And from an IT side, you can also still keep that visibility that you need in the case of a specific security incident. And then Duo being on the mobile, but as well on the endpoint for that device posture check that we can do. So, and that's going to come back to the initial question that was asked. So now that we have multiple different point of integration, different security controls in place, we'll be able to tie the network, the endpoint, as well as the workloads wherever they live. We'll be able to tie them all together through our security platform called SecureX. So this is where we start to really consolidate that investigation process. So making that, being able to make that relationship between an endpoint, a file hash, a URL, a domain, and then the scope of an attack in my environment. So being able to question every security control in my environment, as well as third-party tooling that we could have. So that the third parties could be security intelligence. So some of the open source ones, like the Alien Vault OTX, for example, could be an example of feed we can use. We can leverage our own either private in security intelligence, as well as other types of tooling. Like I said, we can leverage a lot of different platforms through SecureX as the main broker of those integrations. So this is where one main component of SecureX is the SecureX orchestrator, or what I call SXO, which is a it's a way to kind of replace what you would do from like your usual Python script or integration scripts that require coding. Now you can actually build a security workflow. So based on a specific incident takes step A through E, now we can actually do it in a visual fashion. So in the example of Duo, that's something that we could proactively, based on a denied, let's say a denied a denied access from the MFA, since we have an IP address that's coming from, let's say, an outside country, or even like someone tried to connect with my credentials. I got the MFA prompt. I just denied it since I'm not the one that logged in. Well, that can trigger an event inside SecureX to start that investigation process proactively before handing it off to a security analyst to look more deeply into that specific, in this case, it would be compromised credentials that really led to that security incident. So things that we could do could be we create what we call a casebook, which is to glorified notebook that can enable with one click an investigation in the environment. We would be able to just start that process of collecting all the observables, so the user account, the email, the IP address that initiated that authentication request, put that all into that specific casebook, and then we could create an incident based on that, which can be reviewed by the SOC team, for example. Or that could be even go further, go further in that process, even apply some remediation. We could tie that back to, for example, Azure AD and lock down a user because of that specific incident. And then this is where it can, so it's really meant to take some proactive actions before an actual human on the security side takes the lead on remediating something like compromised credentials. So I've touched upon it like quickly. All of the different security products that we've talked today is backed by our threat intelligence team called Cisco Talos. So we're talking 250 plus security researchers. So the main end result of that is all the different security feeds and analysis that is done for all of our products is handled by that team. And it's also published on the Talos Intelligence blog, so that if there's we do have a threat roundup every week to show what's seen from that research team on in the security landscape. And then just some amount of metrics of what we see. So 1.5 million malware samples daily, as well as blocking threat could be from different types of sources. That could be DNS, that could be web, could be emails. We do have a lot of different security controls, so that gives us a really good data lake to work with from a security intelligence standpoint. Just some industry recognition we got, so from different types of.
Sorry, Kevin.
Yep.
I think we missed there's just a quick client here. So it is a complete bundle. It all works together, at least to be good. Just the ZTNA is not really optimized if we don't have the whole bundle. This is a question from the audience.
So if I had to pick and choose, and like there's a lot of specifically the three main network segment, the three main security segments we see, or market segments are the SASE, ZTNA, and then XDR. Those are kind of the three main market areas that the research firms really use. If I had to pick and choose, specifically with the types of ransomware attack that I see or phishing attempts, I do think that Duo is really one of the better position for that specific type of specifically zero trust approach of being able to not only do some posture checking, but also being able to verify the identity of the end users based on other key mechanism or key factors from the MFA standpoint. So the efficacy of it from a ZTNA, like I do think Duo is going to be whether you're SaaS, your IaaS, your on-premises, if you do put something like Duo in front of your app, then you do cover a lot of the risk that you would get from the APTs like that are based on compromised credentials. So like if you protect your Windows Server fleet with something like that, since we can protect RDP, it does help to kind of mitigate that, let's say that lateral movement that could be caused because of a compromised credential type of security incident. So it's ZTNA is not the only the only component in a security posture. There's a lot of different other things, since this is more like to protect really the workloads in the environment. But it is like, I do think from a zero trust standpoint, Duo has the better position between everything that we've talked today, since that's really where you get the visibility from a user authentication standpoint, and then we can integrate with a lot of other types of products. So yeah, so I think we've already, like the three main market segments that I talked, like SASE, zero trust network access, and then extended detection and response are pretty much in all of those three key areas. We have multiple industry recognition from different market research firms in the last 2 years. So that's pretty much it that I had for you today. I do think there's well, if there's any other questions, I think that's pretty much where we are at the moment with the time that we have left.
Could take some questions from the audience. Otherwise, I have some questions too prepared from Okay, well, I'll ask some questions and then we'll see if anybody else thinks of something. So with most security products being cloud delivered, can we still integrate them in our infrastructure with products like Firepower and GFW?
Yep. So like we do see a lot of the workloads that still migrates towards the cloud. So like I said, Office 365 being kind of the the hammered down example, but we can still integrate all of that with our different infrastructure products. So we talked about like Firepower is one that we can leverage all the security intelligence, the telemetry out of it, and then use that in our investigation process, specifically through SecureX as the integration platform. We talked about zero trust networking. Duo does have a lot of integrations that we can do with ICE. So if we want to get that zero trust, not only on the application side, but also on the infrastructure side, this is where we can integrate with that type of products. And then on kind of the last key piece of infrastructure that we see a lot is StealthWatch for the network analytics side of the house. So again, this is really where the SecureX platform really helps to kind of tie everything together, since every products, whether they're cloud or on premises, have their own area of expertise. So we really need that broker of being able to tie everything back together to get that context, that full view of the environment, whether we're again in the office or at home or consuming an application in the data center or in the cloud.
Awesome, thank you. And with workloads going to the cloud, is it possible to integrate with other platforms like AWS or Azure?
Yep, that is definitely possible. And we do have a couple of examples on, we do have a Cisco programmability security team. So we do have a GitHub repository with example to import directly, like pre-baked workflows that can work directly with things like Azure AD or with AWS. So if we want, for example, based on an incident that came from one of the Cisco security product, we could trigger that up to a point where we changed an AWS security group on a specific virtual machine running in AWS. Or the other example I gave was lock down an Azure AD user or leveraging the Microsoft Graph API to be able to really get additional information or enrichment from those specific platforms. So we can leverage data out of those, and we can also do remediative action into those platforms as well, not just inside of the Cisco security realm.
Awesome. And I have a question here from Prebin who asks, we are in the process of getting CMMC level 3 certification. Does your solution comply with the CMMC backslash NIST 800-171 certifications?
So specifically on the NIST side, that's something that I work a lot with different customers on getting that. So that's probably something that we might be able to either follow up probably more offline on getting those actual details, since the framework itself is not necessarily a 2-3 bullet point type of answer. So, but that's definitely something I'd like to take offline with that specific person.
Excellent. Is there any other questions from anyone else? All right. One last call. Otherwise, if there's no other questions, we'll wrap it up for today. Perfect. All right. So thank you everybody for joining us today. It's really appreciated once again that you take some time out of your days to come and join us for this. As a follow-up, obviously, your account reps here at Quadbridge will be reaching out to you to discuss some of the content that you saw today. And hopefully, really our intention is to book some meetings with you, with Kevin as well, and kind of deep dive and understand a little bit more about your infrastructure and where Cisco can fit in to help you on a day-to-day basis. So thank you all very much once again, and I wish you all a very good day.